Hello and a very warm welcome on behalf of the Museum of Art and Photography to the first of our talks in this new year. Last month, we launched MAP's Digital Museum with a special week-long festival, Art is Life. And we were both gratified and humbled by the words of encouragement, praise, and support that we received in response to it. In January and February, we continue with Art is Life as the theme for our talks. In keeping with the idea of spotlighting how integral art is to life and life to art. Art serves as a testimony of who we are, who we were, and who we hope to be, a mirror to our minds, and perhaps the form of art that we are most steeped in and that reflects or questions our values and beliefs as a society at large is that of the popular cultural forms that surround us. Popular prints are an art form that we are all familiar with. From lithographs in the 19th century and film posters or calendar art in the 20th, to contemporary art advertisements even, they have long been part and parcel of our homes and our lives. Today, we are pleased to have with us Ganesh Shivaswamy, lawyer by day and popular print connoisseur, and Ravi Verma scholar by passion. Starting to collect Ravi Verma prints in the early 1990s, he has now built up a substantial collection. And today, we are very thrilled to have him present a special talk for MAP, drawing on works from our collection and tracing the evolution of a certain popular aesthetic in India, from the influences of Raja Ravi Verma to a new modernism through the significant work of popular print artist Raghuveer Mulgaonkar. Ganesh's full biography will be pasted on the chat box, as will a link to the Artist Life Festival if you should have missed it when it premiered. Please share any questions you may have for him through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Last but not least, I'd also like to introduce our sign language interpreter for today's session, Priyanka Kalyan. Thank you, Priyanka. And now the floor, so as to speak, Ganesh, is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you to the Museum of Art and Photography, Abhishek, Kamini, Madhura. I'm going to share my screen now. There we go. Yes. Shilpa and Rucha, thank you all for making my place in the Museum of Art and Photography very pleasant. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. When speaking of an artist who has not been spoken of too much before, I've decided to do it by placing the artist in context rather than placing him in isolation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin the narrative this evening with the introduction of lithography. Lithography was actually started quite by accident by a gentleman called Alois Senefelder in Prague. And what he does is he refines the process towards the end of the 18th century. He gets an exclusive contract in England, and till then he's calling it plano printing. In 1819, he translates a book and calls it The Complete Course of Lithography. And it is then that this concept of lithography is born. Now, the reason why I said 1819 is because I wanted to tell you how quickly lithography came to India. So it came into India actually in 1821 by a gentleman called Dr. Ryan of the Bengal Medical Services. And as early as in 1826, you see the first lithographic press, the General Lithographic Press in Bombay, August of 1826. This is how quickly lithography gets absorbed into India, and you actually have views, etc., being printed. But what happens thereafter, it gets embraced so quickly that the Maharaja of Mysore, Mummadi Krishnaraja Vodiyar, establishes something called the Mudrakshara Shala in Mysore. And this is a hand-colored lithograph of 1850. So this is how early now it's being taken into and absorbed by the people in India. So 1850 and 1876, you have the Calcutta Art Studio. I'm sorry, 1878. 1878, on the other side of India, you have the Chitrashala press in Pune. This is one of the very early chromolithographs. And in 1894, you have the birth of Shakuntala by the Ravi Varma Fine Art Lithographic Press. So this is how quickly now lithography comes into India. And in September of 1894, you have these two pictures, the Lakshmi and Saraswati. So we've traced how lithography comes into India, it's absorbed into India, and it reaches this point in September of 1894 when really the Big Bang takes place. Pictures such as this are so sought after and taken into society that it, especially pictures of the Ravi Varma press, that it starts changing all kinds of things. One of the things which is changed is the way in which we look at religious imagery. Suddenly, they have human form as you are seeing them on your screen. But the kind of changes are much more. Everything is beginning to change. The way in which we are advertising, the textile labels, our postcards, cinema, and most importantly, the later artists. And this is where Mulgaonkar fits in. So I have decided that I'm going to show you two aspects today. One is how it altered the way in which cinema in India started to be envisioned. And the earliest person being, of course, Dada Saheb Phalke. But in case you don't understand the connection with the Ravi Varma chromolithograph, here it is. Look at the movie poster on the right and look at the chromolithograph on the left. Ganga is descending exactly as in the chromolithograph. Shiva looks up. And then, of course, you have the Parvati in the little cartouche looking exactly like as it is posed in the chromolithograph. This is Dada Saheb Phalke's movie poster. Let's look at what happens when M.S. Subbalakshmi decides to play Shakuntala in the Tamil cinema Shagundalai. And this is, of course, quite early on in 1941. And this is the movie poster. So if you look at the cartouche in the middle, I don't think I need to explain to you where that comes from. That comes from a chromolithograph from the Ravi Varma press. So cinema is heavily influenced by the chromolithographs. And now we move into the later artists. Here is one, Indra Sharma. We're going to be talking about Indra Sharma a little later. And here is his interpretation of the descent of Ganga. The other is Kondai Raju. Kondai Raju is a South Indian artist who worked prominently out of Kovilpatti, and he actually sort of creates a very Tamil Nadu sense or a Tamil Nadu style to the popular culture there. And we know where the Lakshmi comes from, and that again is from the chromolithograph which you're seeing on your screen now. This is K. Madhavan, born in Trivandrum, and he works a lot out of Madras. He was actually referred to as the Norman Rockwell of South India by Stephen Inglis. He painted extensively for movie posters and for the covers of magazines, just like Norman Rockwell did. And he had a prolific career in the popular art segment. I'm moving now into S.M. Pandit. S.M. Pandit, he lived between 1916 and 1991, was from Gulbarga in Karnataka. He graduated from the J.J. School of Art and he commenced his career in 1913, again painting for cinema, the Bombay Metro Theatre. Kajri Jain says in her book, Gods in the Bazaar, she is of the opinion that S.M. Pandit was the true successor to Ravi Varma. And what you're seeing on your screen now is an alteration to the aesthetic. And I want to take you into how the aesthetic begins to change slowly but surely. And you will see it enhanced in Mulgaonkar's works. So what did S.M. Pandit do? Between 1938 and 1939, he co-founded the Young Artist Commercial Studio, where he designed a lot of publicity material for the cinema. And he designed advertisements. He painted for Mafatlal, Kohinoor, and even Katao Industries. He designed a lot of posters for the Film India. And in 1944, he decided to go on his own. And he started a studio of his own in Mumbai's Shivaji Park. Here is a painting of Shakuntala Patralekhana, again, very influenced by Ravi Verma's works, but different. What is different? Clearly the way in which women are now being depicted, because this is where the move and evolution of the feminine aesthetic begins. You have these women, very luscious women, and their attire is getting a little more scanty. And you will notice that and that evolution as we move on into Mulgamkar's works. One of Pandit's students was Raghuber Mulgankar, and he was painting also for India. According to Ajit Jain, Mulgankar signed his initial works as the student of S.M. Pandit. As the studio of S.M. Pandit. Let's look at another work by S.M. Pandit, and this is the Burmese lady. This again was very much painted for the cinema industry. But who is Raghuber Mulgankar? Well, this is Raghuber Mulgankar, and I was able to get this image from a researcher, Saurabh Dusani. Raghuber Mulgankar, there's a little bit of confusion on the date of his birth. According to Kajri Jain, she says 1922, and according to Saurabh, he says it's 1918, and he lives till 1976. He was born in Goa in a village called Asnoda, and his father, Shankar Mulgankar, was also a painter. The original surname of the family was Rajya Daksha, which they changed to Mulgankar after the village from which they hailed. It is also said that A.X. Chintade spotted Mulgankar's talents and urged the father to send Mulgankar to Bombay. Mulgankar started his work in the studio of S.M. Pandit. Now, interestingly, I was reading Kajri Jain's book, and she says at one point of time, Mulgankar actually got fed up. That's the word she used, and I'm quoting, fed up of signing his works as Studio S.M. Pandit, and he opened a studio of his own. This is one of the paintings by Mulgankar from the Hastashilpa Trust, and this is the Mulgankar Art Studio. The Mulgankar Art Studio was established again in Bombay in 1944, and Mulgankar follows more or less in S.M. Pandit's line. He illustrates many Marathi books, magazines, and the publishers like Keshav Bikaji, Raikar, etc. From 1950, he started illustrating the cover pages of Deepalakshmi, Vasant, and Anuprita. Interestingly, as you will see now, is that Mulgankar's style does change. He accentuates the female form, and there's a lot of effeminization. I'm going to take you through all of them. It is at this point that we arrive at the album. The Museum of Art and Photography has an album of Mulgankar's works. And when Abhishek called me and told me, Ganesh, you have to look at this album, I was amazed to see such a treasure. I'll tell you why this album is important. The reason why this album is important is because of three reasons. One, in India as of now, there is a general apathy towards preservation of any culture. But interestingly, aggravating this problem is the fact that most of these studios, be it the Ravi Verma Press or the studio of S.M. Pandit or even Mulgankar studio, these were all commercial enterprises. When I started researching on the book on Ravi Verma, one of them replied to me and I asked, where are your catalogs? Where are your stock registers? How much did you sell them for? The answer was, do you think we were going to keep all of this? Because we expected some Ganesh Shivaswamy to come later on and ask us for all of this. It was only a commercial establishment. So we kept all of these only so long as the taxation department wanted us to keep them. After that, they were all discarded. So there is absolutely no archive left in relation to all of these people. Aggravating it even further is the fact that there is a great condescension in relation to popular art in India. So if you put all of these things, three things together, you suddenly have a compilation of works by the artist and the studio of the works of Mulgaonkar, making it an absolute treasure. As people go on to discover the works of Mulgaonkar, this is going to be a place where everybody is going to keep coming to. And in a sense, I must be honest, I feel a sense of privilege to be speaking about this album first. The other thing is, when I was examining the images in the album, which you're seeing scrolling on your screen now, I noticed a few things. One is what Mulgaonkar was influenced by, and the other is what's really quite unique to him. The influences which I was able to discern is that he was heavily influenced by the chromolithographs from the Ravi Verma press. The second influence I was able to discern is that he was influenced by a Marathi sculptor called G.K. Matre. And then he was influenced by Marathi culture and religious observances which are unique to him. What is unique, which is unique to Marathi culture? What is unique to Mulgaonkar is the fact that there's a lot of sublimity in the works which he does. And then there is a gravitation towards the feminine aesthetic. Now let's examine each of these. First, I'm going to take you through the influence from the chromolithographs of the Ravi Verma press. So here we have on the left Vishnu Garuda Vahanam from the album, and on the right is the chromolithograph from the Ravi Verma press. The stylization of the eagle is quite similar to the one which you see on the right. Here's another one, Vishwamitra Tapobang. Now what I want you to see is that the sage is similar in both of the pictures, but the difference is the way in which the Apsara is now right in front. And he is enhancing, he's focusing on the feminine aesthetic. The spotlight continues here. Shuka and Ramba. Again, the sage at the back is quite looking away and almost similar to the one in the chromolithograph, but the woman is in the foreground. Let's move on. Nala Damayanti. This is a chromolithograph again from the Ravi Verma press on the left, but this is not from a painting of Raja Ravi Verma. This is a painting of M.V. Dhurandhar, who's another Marathi artist. The original painting, of course, in the collection of the Royal Gaikwad collection in Baroda, I believe Dhurandhar would have made an exemplar for the press, and it is Dhurandhar's exemplar which gets printed in the chromolithograph, which you see on the left. The one on the right is Mulgaonkar's version. Now, this is where I think the aesthetic is very visible. One is the way in which the woman is enhanced. Her curves are enhanced, and the way in which she is portrayed is very sensuous. But the sensuality in this picture is not restricted only to her, because if you look at Nala, in comparison to the picture on the left, there is also an enhancement of the masculine sensuality here. It almost verges on eroticism, because the way in which the soft and supple drape of Damayanti almost cascades over a masculine and virile thigh is very evident in the way in which Mulgaonkar is now accentuating sexuality and eroticism. Now, this continues I'm going to take you here into Usha's dream. And here, of course, Mulgaonkar is beginning to come of his own. But again, the way in which both of these people are posed, you can see that the influence is from the chromolithograph on the right of your screen. Chitralekha. Chitralekha, again, quite similar, but again, now we are beginning to see a unique aesthetic to Mulgaonkar's works. Ram Pattabhishek. The composition is almost identical to the chromolithograph. The way in which Hanuman is placed, of course, in replacement of the sage, you have, I would believe, Lakshmana on the right corner. But the composition, including the parasol on top, is almost similar to the chromolithograph on the left. And this is Ganga, the descent of Ganga. There's a small part of it in the album on which you see on the screen on the left. And this is very similar to the works with the chromolithograph on the right. Here again, the enhanced femininity which you see on the right of your screen, but the pose exactly the same as the chromolithograph which you're seeing on the left. We now come to the works of G.K. Matre. G.K. Matre lived between 1879 and 1947. He also was with the J.J. School, and he was a phenomenal sculptor. This is his sculpture of To the Temple. And it was so well received that even Raja Ravi Varma wrote a letter to him appreciating him for this particular sculpture. This, of course, is an archival photograph of two poses of G.K. Matre's sculpture. So iconic was this that G.K. Matre went on to make it a part of his letterhead. I was able to get this letterhead from the divisional archives in Mysore, and it's interestingly written to Sir Mirza Ismail, the Diwan of Mysore. At that point of time, of course, he was the Huzur secretary to the Maharaja. And if you look on the left, the little cartouche is the To the Temple sculpture of Matre. Let us look at how Mulgaonkar is influenced by this very sculpture. And these are two magazine covers of Deepa Lakshmi. And I believe they are two poses of the To the Temple sculpture of G.K. Matre. And if you didn't get the comparison, I've decided to put all four of them together. So there you go. The way in which she's holding a vessel as also the plate, the thali, the puja thali, they are identical to G.K. Matre's To the Temple. Here's the second influence, G.K. Matre, the Marathi sculptor. We move on to the next influence, and that is the unique religious observances in Maharashtra. You see, the Ganesh Utsav started as a private home puja. According to the India Today article, it says that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj had initiated a public celebration to promote culture and nationalization. This continued until, of course, Tilak came along, Bala Gangadhar Tilak came along, and he said, we needed something to unite India. And he realized the power of religion. He selected, therefore, Ganapati and making it a big public celebration in Maharashtra, which continues to this day. The way in which Mulgaonkar interprets Ganesha is, I think, the cutest representation of Ganesha, because you see all the three phases of Ganesha. You see him in combat with Shiva on the left. You see his head being reinstated in the middle. And then, of course, you see Ganesha circumambulating the divine couple on the right. But what is interesting to me is the way in which Mulgaonkar has delineated the face of Shiva. The delineation of the face, I was able to find a similarity. in Dhurandar's work. This again is a chromolithograph from the Ravi Verma press. And look at the way in which Shiva is delineated. It's the same slim bearded face which you see in the previous slide. I'm going to go back to the previous slide for just a bit, because there is Shiva's face according to Dhurandhar and of course according to Mulgaonkar. But it's not just the face of Shiva, it's also the face of Shivaji, who's the other great figure for Maharashtra, called the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Today, again, Shivaji is central to the Marathi culture. It was again Tilak, according to Caroline McLean. She says that it was Tilak who took up the cause for constructing a memorial for Shivaji in 1895. A meeting was convened in Pune to raise funds, and by December of 1895, Caroline McLean says over 15,000 rupees had been raised by over 60,000 people who contributed. And this is Mulgaonkar's interpretation of Shivaji. Again, I feel probably inspired by Dhurandar's interpretation of the face. Here are some of the other illustrations of Shivaji as a young man. And this, of course, is his Pattabhishek or Shivaji in Darbar. I now move on to what is unique about Mulgaonkar's interpretation of divinity. Look at the pictures which you're seeing on your screen. Both of these are Dattatreya, and evidently what has changed is that the face has become very sublime. And this transition of aesthetic is captured in an interview between Kajri Jain and a Nathdwara artist, Indra Sharma. And I'm quoting from Gods in the Bazaar. I'm going to show you one more image. That's the image of the infant Dattatreya. I'm going to go back here. Yes. Indra Sharma tells Kajri Jain that he said he did not prefer SM Pandit because SM Pandit's works looked very realistic. According to Indra Sharma, he says that his figures looked more like humans and less like gods. So what did Indra Sharma feel a god should look like? So Indra Sharma, again in an interview in Kajri Jain's book, says, and I'm quoting, he says, now the body is very strong, but we will not show the anatomy. For God's body, the description is of a gentle and beautiful body. There should be no muscles, he says. We people avoid muscles. I'm actually quoting from his interview. And here you see the transition because the faces are becoming sublime and quite effeminate. Let's look at some of the other pictures. This is the infant Dattatreya. Of course, it is a picture of an infant, but in Kajri Jain's book, here is an interview with Yogendra Rastogi. He says, if the face and the eyes are made larger and more visible, it is to enhance the benevolent emotion, beauty and power, the kripa, the bhava, the bhavyata, and the shakti. He says, Yogendra Rastogi says, the gods must have a smooth and gentle body and large faces. Their expressions must be tranquil, he says, almost meditative. For divine will, unlike that of a human, is not limited to the human body. This is the trajectory which Mulgaonkar is taking. So here is the infant Hanuman trying to capture the sun. And here are scenes from Shakuntala. Let us look again at Mulgaonkar's unique style now. Again, look at the picture on the right. This is Shakuntala and Dushyanta. And look at the way in which Shakuntala is portrayed in the picture. Highly sensuous, almost verging on erotic. Kajri Jain says that Mulgaonkar heavily influenced other artists, and this is a page from her book. If imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, here is Murugakani almost imitating Mulgaonkar's signature. And Murugakani was a very popular artist in his own right. And therefore, here is the influence later on. Now we come back to Mulgaonkar's works. Look at these two pictures of Shiva. If we understand Shiva to be a very virile and masculine god, the faces are indeed effeminate. But it is this effeminization of the faces which is so sought after. And this, I think, resonates in what Yogendra Rastogi says. He says the faces must be tranquil and meditative. Here are two tranquil and meditative faces. I was speaking the other day to Dr. Annapurna Garimala and I asked her, what do you think of Mulgaonkar's works? She told me, you see, Ganesh, the way in which you look at Mulgaonkar's works, there are absolutely no pores or blemishes on the skin. And there was a reason why there were no pores or blemishes on the skin. And this is because Mulgaonkar was heavily using the airbrushing technique. And what happened was he airbrushed these faces to absolute perfection. And it is because of this airbrushing that Mulgaonkar died of lung cancer. So when I was thinking about it and I said, look at the way in which airbrushing killed Mulgaonkar, I was thinking metaphorically that's so interesting because airbrushing, if it is construed as a synonym to superficiality, well, the moral of this wonderful story is that superficiality can kill you, as it did with airbrushing and Mulgaonkar. I'm now moving on to the feminine aesthetic. If you look at these two images on your screen now, it's quite interesting that they should appear as covers on the magazine. Look at the way in which the women have been portrayed. They're wearing far less, they're showing much more. And these were all in the 1960s. India seemed to be very accepting of images of this nature at that point of time. Well, how accepting were they? This brings me really to almost the last slide of my presentation. The talk for this evening is the evolution of the popular aesthetic. And here on your screen, for the first time, I'm showing you the Ravi Verma. I kept this to the end for a reason. Is because now I wanted to show you how the feminine aesthetic, especially in popular art, evolved. We go back to the Ravi Verma press with the chromolithograph on the left of your screen at the top. This is Shakuntala Patralekana, derived from an exemplar painting by Raja Ravi Verma. We then move to the picture below it, and that is the painting by S.M. Pandit. And then we move on to the image on the right, on the top, and that is by Raghuveer Mulgaonkar. And finally, we end in the image on the right bottom of your screen. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is from Amar Chitrakatha. I'm very interested to know how and why Amar Chitrakatha portrays its women in that fashion. And I read from Carleen McLean, her Immortal Comics of India. And I'm quoting from her book. She says, less impaired by Victorian sensibilities than Ravi Verma, Anant Pai, the founder of Amar Chitrakatha, envisioned a modified costume for Indian women. One which was draped from the hips down, much like a sari, but which revealed the comic book heroine's voluptuous curves even more. Now, this brings me to a question. And this brings me interestingly to my concluding question. The image on the left top of your screen was the image which was criticized. We have Sister Nivedita, who said, how in the Indian aesthetic scheme of things could a fat woman lie on the grass? She was, of course, referring to Ravi Varma's chromolithograph of Shakuntala Patralekhana. That met with criticism, but it is the sensuous, voluptuous woman on the right bottom of your screen who we as a society have decided is perfectly fine to even show our children in a comic book. The evolution goes from Ravi Varma to S.M. Pandit, S.M. Pandit to Mulgaonkar, Mulgaonkar to Amar Chitrakatha. This is the evolution. I am therefore perplexed because if society has been so accepting of the image which you see in Amar Chitrakatha, why are we so judgmental of women and the way in which they represent themselves in society? This is the first question. I believe that all of us must start thinking about what is the standard of aesthetic which we would like to maintain before we can judge a woman or a man in society. We have to be conscious of the fact that this is our culture and this is the evolution of the popular aesthetic. I am also asking a second question. The second question is that if the women on the screen, which you're seeing now, could be the subject matter of a lot of adoration, why on earth's name are we treating women in reality with so much of subjugation? This is the second question, which I'm going to leave all of y'all with. I think it is extremely important that we ask these questions and we examine the present state of affairs from the evolution of the popular feminine aesthetic, for the reason that we cannot have our women to be shown in a manner in which we find them and judge them constantly. So think about it. Think about where the feminine aesthetic and the standard in relation to the feminine aesthetic lies. We have embraced all of these images. We have adored all of them. So let us start thinking, being more practical and less judgmental. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I conclude my talk. Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen now. Yes. Shilpa, you seem to be muted.
Yes, thank you so much for such a thought-provoking presentation and leaving us all with a lot of food for thought. Audience members who would like to ask Ganesh questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to do so. In the meantime, Ganesh, while we wait for some of the questions to come in, I was wondering, since you've talked, of course, the entire talk was based on the idea of the popular aesthetic, but maybe if you could reflect a little bit on what sort of relationship this might have had with the fine art aesthetic of the moment as well. And when you look at even the question of the feminine form or the ideal feminine beauty, how there were changes happening in that space as well, and whether there was some kind of correlation in this or dialogue.
So interestingly, at the time when you had Ravi Varma, the fine art aesthetic and the popular art aesthetic were almost the same. There was so much of influence because Ravi Varma's fine art, if you were to compare it to a painting, and the chromolithographs were almost the same. Interestingly, there was a Marathi actor, Balagandharva, was so influenced by Ravi Varma. that he started adopting the Ravi Verma aesthetic, the popular art aesthetic. And I read somewhere that he also started becoming a person who used to teach women how to attire themselves. So there was a very sort of seamless integration between fine art, popular art, and society through these three people of Ravi Verma's paintings, the chromolithographs, and Balagandharva. So there was at one point of time a lot of correlation between the two. But somewhere down the line, you notice that this begins to, sort of go their respective ways. And that is where it sort of comes to today, because we really don't know where we stand. One, of course, it's impossible for women to go around walking like that, but that's not the point which I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is stop being judgmental. Stop being judgmental. Stop telling women how they should or should not behave, because the Indian aesthetic has always been evolving and we've embraced all of them. Amar Chitra Katha, we've shown our children. So what was wrong?
Yes, as a woman, a perfectly fair question that I'm completely on board with.
No, when I said women, I mean everybody. I mean, stop judging everybody. I mean, I think we should just be accepting and stop judging.
Okay, a wonderful ideal for us to aspire to. I see a couple of comments have come in. A lot of thanks for your presentation from Irina Glushkova, Savio, and Ashrafi Bhagat, who has mentioned the male gaze, which I guess is perhaps something interesting to touch upon, since you are talking about the feminine aesthetic and Mulgaonkar. That maybe, and a lot of the artists that you've referred to actually, of course, we're talking all about male artists who are then
True.
representing what they see as the embodiment of the feminine ideal. So what might be some, thoughts around that?
I'll tell you, the question of male gaze comes up in every talk of mine. And the reality of the situation is this. There is I believe, a documentary. I'm forgetting the name of the documentary. You can look it up. It's on YouTube. It's about the women artists of the world. There is something called the Vasari Corridor in Florence, which contains a whole series of self-portraits of artists. And the presenter begins the conversation by saying, of all of the people who are here, the percentage of women artists is very negligible. In fact, she mentions a percentage which I think is even in the single digit. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a situation where we are unable to make a comparison between how a man would paint and how a woman would paint, especially in the popular art segment. How many women artists painted for popular art? Hardly anyone. I can only think so far of one, which was Mangalabai Tamburati, who had one chromolithograph printed at the Ravi Verma press. Apart from that, there is no bulk of female artists telling us what they think of men. So how are we to even make such an assessment? That's the problem which we have. The other thing is, if you look really at, I knew this question was going to come up, which is why I spent a little more time with the Nala Damayanti to tell you that he accentuated even male sexuality there. So that's the only sort of glimpse to it. But really, I mean, there's no way in which we are able to give you an assessment of how a man would look at it versus how a woman would look at it.
Yeah.
You women have to step up, I think.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, art historically, since you had expanded the scope of that, you would, apart from the fact that, of course, there were fewer women, which also is a reflection of the opportunities afforded to them. There is also the fact that several times, several women artists in world over have only been discovered at much later dates, right? They weren't really known of, so they were kind of hidden, kept behind the wings, as it were.
You see that when I say that this thing has not, when I say there is no evidence to tell us, it's because of both the reasons. One is probably not painting. Second is there's not enough academia on it.
Yeah. So well, something for the scholars, I guess, who are
Yes,
watching and might.
yes, absolutely.
Uh,
So much to
there
be
is
done.
a question from Channa Achilingam, who's asked, what is the connection between the European aesthetic and the Indian aesthetic of this time? And also said that it's a great presentation that you've done.
Oh, thank you. Well, the European aesthetic was very much there because if Mulgaonkar derived from S.M. Pandit, who derived from the chromolithographs of the Ravi Varma press, which influence is heavily existent. Ravi Varma was heavily influenced by European artists. Ravi Varma, of course, followed a lot of the Indian texts and scriptures, but then the interpretation was very European. A lot of the continental artists, German artists especially, because he was buying a lot of German books, you see a lot of that in Ravi Verma's works. And quite a lot of them have sort of resonated into Mulgaonkar.
Okay. Stephen Heiler asks, I'm confused by your comments at the very end. You show the evolution of the depiction of feminine sensuality in the last image of 4 different pieces. When you state that we should stop judging, are you saying that we should accept these sensual, even erotic views of women as an ideal prototype? What about the rejection of that by Indian feminists?
Not to be judgmental, I think, is going to take care of everything. It's a very tall order. It's a very tall order. Keep in mind that the feminine aesthetic has been here and is here to stay. So for us to cabin, crib, and confine it, like Shakespeare said, I think is wrong. Of course, exposition is impossible to do in society across the world. But to judge women all the time, especially when you don't have a standard of your own, is something which is going to give you a lot of confusion. That's what I'm saying. So think about it. Look at the temple sculptures. You're fine with them. Look at Amar Chitrakatha. You're fine with that. But then you continue to judge. Why?
I think what she's perhaps shining a light on is the other end of the spectrum, right? One where you are looking at the women as the subject, but here where women can look at themselves as the heroes of their own stories. Or
Okay, wait. Actually, I had something to say about the word feminism. I
Mhm.
think feminism is a wonderful thing, aspiring to empower and give us an egalitarian society.
Mhm.
Now, if feminism is going to judge women, then it's not feminism. It's not feminism. It's counterproductive to the cause of feminism.
All right. Another interesting question from David, who asks, when you refer to the Indian aesthetic, does it primarily refer to the Hindu aesthetic, or do you perceive a difference there?
Uh, well, mostly yes, because if you look, for instance, at the Mohammedan aesthetic, the human body is not depicted. Or if you look at Christian aesthetic in India, look at what happened to Fonseca, Angelo da Fonseca. So the only aesthetic which has undergone such a change is the Hindu aesthetic. And the Hindu derived aesthetic, as in the sense of Marathi women, etc. Yes.
Okay, oh, okay, this is by an anonymous person who's just asked, apart from the evolution of the feminine form, did complexion also evolve? But I'm going to just rephrase that a little bit.
Oh, Dark Lives Matter.
No, of course. But I think
I
it's,
don't think so.
if it's just something to see whether that's a reflection of sorts that
No,
he.
because this obsession with is not really an obsession, but the stereotyping is what I'm going to use. I think has always been there, and it was much before the popular aesthetic also. I mean, if you look at the Dhyana Shlokams in Sanskrit, they are, well, the Dhyana Shlokams in Sanskrit go both ways. So that would be wrong to say. But yes, there is a sort of an obsession, I think.
To Chinar Balsaraf, who has asked if this collection of Mulgankar works is available to view online.
That museum will have to answer.
Yes, not yet, but Chinar, we hope it will soon be available on view on our website. Chinar has also asked if you think the work of artist Dinanath Dalal is also part of this legacy.
No.
And from another anonymous attendee, I mean, this is moving a little bit away, but they've asked about to what extent you think the Chola or Vijayanagar bronzes might have had an influence on the aesthetic of Ravi Verma.
Of Ravi Verma? All right. There is a reference in the diary of C. Rajaraja Verma that these people, that when I say these people, I mean the brothers Ravi Verma as also Rajaraja Verma were studying sculptures. There is a reference to this in Suchindram when they go there and they are looking at the sculptures and saying they're very beautiful. The Chola bronzes as such, you are able to find similarities between, for example, a Chola Parvati and some of the feminine portrayals in Ravi Verma. For example, there is a picture of the victory of Indrajit, and you have Indra's wife being dragged. And that pose is very similar, possibly to a Chola bronze. But having said that, there is a sort of a commonality in the aesthetic representation, because it will also look like a Chola Parvati. It also looks like the Venus de Milo. So, there I think Ravi Verma had this talent to spot something which both a European could also spot as also an Indian. So yeah, I specifically with Chola, no.
Okay, well, I think that's perhaps an interesting thing where you're talking of something whether that could almost make it to a universal aesthetic somewhere.
There is something, yeah, there is a universal, there is a lot of universality. You see, if you look at it, if you reverse engineer it really, the reason why there is a lot of acceptability is because there's a lot of universality. Because it's appealing to a large number of people. So a person who's talented enough to spot something which is popular, that's how he gets accepted and it becomes so popular.
Okay, and a last comment from Siddhanand, who has talked about the artist Baraskar. I don't know if you're aware of him.
No, it's not in my talk this evening.
Right, so just saying that apparently he made similar work and you might want to look him up.
Oh, okay. I'd love to look that up, yes.
Well, I think this has been an excellent presentation, Ganesh. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Lots of compliments have come in. And it's been a really thorough and interesting and at times quite provoking presentation, looking over how this aesthetic has evolved in time, and also what that relationship might mean to us in the present day. So thank you once again for doing this. It has been a pleasure having you. And
thank you.
I hope that we will be able to have you speak at the museum when we're open someday as well.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the time when the Museum of Art and Photography map is on the cultural map of Bangalore physically.
So are we. And thank you all for coming and attending today's event. We hope we will be able to catch you at our next event as well. Thank you, Priyanka, for taking the time out to interpret for us today. And that's, I guess, it about from us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.